Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Perry. I'm the Vice President of Service Delivery and Web Analytics here at Practical Data Solutions. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar of 2021 RVUs, Empowering Healthcare Users with Self-Service Analytics. And joining me today is CEO of PDS, Russell Hendrickson. Russell, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
So for those of you that are not familiar with Practical Data Solutions, we work with healthcare organizations to make data actionable with using visualizations, analytics, and dashboards, and you'll see many of those today. And these allow organizations to be data-driven organizations to strive for excellence.
And if you've attended any of our webinars in the past, we've been trying to run sort of quarterly groups this year. And so last month we talked about making RVUs meaningful and the need to stage multiple sets of RVUs, which we're going to touch on today. But today's webinar is really about empowering healthcare users with self-service analytics. And then to round out this quarter's session, we'll be talking about web visualization and Excel. And we'll talk a little bit more how that integrates to today's topic as we go through the webinar.
So 2020 and 2021 has certainly been some unexpected challenges, both in our personal life and professional lives. And CMS has thrown quite a few changes in telehealth reimbursement, increases in E&M codes, and even a reduction to the conversion factor. So as we talked last month in the webinar, with all of these changes, comparing productivity RVUs, it's not really apples and apples. You know, with all of the changes in 2021, I can't be looking just at 2020. Easily compare 2020 RVUs with 2021 RVUs. So the need to model two data sets has become very important, so I can really see how the adjusted 2021 RVU values compare to 2020 RVUs. So let's go ahead and take a look at a visual, and we'll go ahead and turn our cameras off so we can see the screen fully here. Russell, do you want to go through one of those comparison RVU dashboards?
Yeah, so one of the big things that we talked about in the webinar last quarter was the fact that if you just look straight across at, say, 2020 RVUs, and you compare them to 2021 this year, what we're doing this year, you know, by and large, you're going to see increases, especially, you know, with your primary care physicians and any specialties that do a lot of E&M codes. But because of the significant changes that CMS made, found is that's not really providing a good perspective on what's really gone on. And so when you calculate 2021 RVUs and adjust them back to the 2020 scale, which is what we're showing here, we create a new column of data in our metrics, and then we start to visualize that. What you can start to see is that some of the physicians where it looked like they were seeing productivity increases might actually have declined in their RVU usage. And our visual analytics makes it very easy to sort of highlight all those physicians that are right on the edge and start to see where their performance is actually down from where they were. Now, I don't want to repeat what we did, you know, last webinar. You can certainly go back and watch that. But the question and sort of some of the key things that we talked about was, when you're staging analytics, then how do we provide this information out to different end users? And how do we make sure the right people have the right information to manage effectively? And that's really the goal for today's webinar, is what is self-service analytics, right? And the very topic of self-service analytics is not a new topic. It's talked about in a lot of different ways, but it really means getting the right information to the right users the right way at the right time. You know, and if you think about sort of traditionally, we have, you know, IT department where we have to write up a report request and then send off that request. And it might take, you know, days or even a week or two to get the information back. By the time the user gets the information back, the need to make a decision on that or the need to have impactful information immediately to better manage may have already passed. So the whole idea with self-service analytics is we're allowing the users to help themselves to data quickly and easily without having to sort of jump through all those hoops or run through all that process.
So Russell, you talk about users, and we think about users in really three general categories. You've got the executives in leadership that are more big picture data users. Then you have the physician and clinical staff And they're looking at more data that's relevant, so maybe a department view or a specialty view. And then you've got what I call the data people, the people that are really into sort of the numbers and the details. And those are really your operations, finance, the analyst users. So if you take those three groups of general users and you categorize them into 4 areas of data and analytic needs. The first is your power users. And those power users need access to all of the data and all of the tool functionality. So they're the users that are heavy into the tool and all of the data. They're mostly the users that are going to be creating those self-service reports and dashboards. And then you have your analyst users, and they're getting all of the data, but it's more focused data sets, so data that's important to them. And we provide focused data so it's easy for them to understand. They, again, still require data and the associated details, and they need most of the tool functionality where your power users are using all of your tool functionality. And then if we look at the leadership, those high-level executives that I just sort of categorized, they're looking for key data. They need quick access to blended data so they can get the key performance indicators as quickly as possible. And then the fourth piece is the operational folks, and they also need key data elements, and they're looking at some specific, and they need to get to associated detailed data. But that detailed data is probably more of a limited data set than all of the data.
You know, so it's interesting because, Michelle, you just talked about limiting data, and yet I talked about this analytics and helping people the data. What's interesting is no matter what sort of category of user, and obviously we're kind of generalizing here, but no matter what category of user you ask the question, do you need access to information? How much information do you need? What metrics? What data sets? Everybody will tell you they want everything, right? You hear this all the time. We want it all. Of course, give us access to everything. The problem with that is if you give too much data, it's confusing for users. They can be overwhelmed. They can't find the metrics they really need to be effective in their role. And in healthcare in particular, unlike other industries, I think this is most prevalent when we talk about clinicians in the healthcare setting and their need for data based on their role. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. But Michelle, let's dive into power users and analysts. We kind of group them into one category. Why don't you walk us through the kinds of data and information and tools they need?
Yeah, so these are the users that are actually utilizing the tool, as I mentioned earlier. They're not just about the data. They're the users that are building the dashboards, building the reports so that you can roll out this self-service analytics. And they're the key users that are bringing analytics to all of your organization. So let's go ahead and take a look at some visualizations and how they might utilize the data in the tool.
Yeah, so here's an example of a performance opportunity visualization that's actually look at predicting if we could improve physician performance, let's say across the board by 10%, which physicians, where might we see some of the biggest gains, or if we could look at those physicians that are maybe performing below benchmark, where might we see some quick wins on that. And as you noticed earlier, you know, I was literally just changing the charts, point and click, drag and drop. I need to be able to not just produce reports and build these types of dashboards, but I need to be able to focus them and make them easy. So whatever the data set is looking at, I might need to, as organization initiatives change, maybe it's because of COVID, scheduling patient access changes, you know, I may need to be able to go in and start manipulating and republishing and ensuring that the people that are accessing data have what they need quickly and easily. So when we start to look at, let's say, where are their largest or the top performers in productivity, we can very quickly see, you know, potentially what divisions or specialties they're in. Or if we want to just focus in on patient satisfaction, again, we could start to see which areas we want to focus on. So it's not enough that I'm interacting with dashboards. I need the ability to publish data and really serve all those different users.
Yeah, and when you're servicing those users, you want to be able to blend multiple data sets. So here's another example of a visual dashboard that I've blended general appointment data with provider utilization and third neck. So by creating this type of visualization, I can empower my users to really understand, how, for example, provider availability is going to impact the third next available. And these power users and analysts not only utilize the tools, but they may want to be able to also go into the data. So in this visualization, there's a drill from the visualization graphical data into a cube, which is summarized data, where this power user can go in, work with the report. They can actually modify and change the report. Okay, and then they can also go ahead and drill into the detail. So I've gone from that visualization into a cube and then into the detail information where I can get more specific information on my appointments or whatever I'm trying to do some analysis on.
Yeah, I think what we've shown here, the ability to work with detailed data, and we'll talk about guided analytics coming up, the ability to provide, these analysts with cubes, OLAP, where they can slice and click, point and click, slice and dice, drag and drop through different data sets, making it very easy to really do analysis and provide the answers. And then, all the way back to where we started, all those different pieces, whether it's detail or, summary, OLAP data, building out into our visual dashboards that serve the different users is really key. And one of the biggest users of visual dashboards is leadership. So Michelle, let's talk about what leadership typically is looking for in dashboards.
Yeah, so again, these leaders are highly focused on the organization performance. So they need quick, focused data. They're probably not into detail. They're very busy. Most of them sort of, just tell me how we're doing today. So if we look at an example of a visual dashboard, here's multiple data sets blended together. So they have one perspective of the data, one place to go. And I've got some revenue data along with some collections data, so I can easily see where I have some opportunities. And then I'm even pulling in some appointment data where I can, of course, interact with the dashboard. And of course, most importantly, you've got that patient satisfaction data, so I can make sure that we are servicing our patients appropriately. And this example is also not only blending the different data sets together, we've actually blended two systems together. So many organizations, maybe your organization is, moving off of one system onto another system. So this blending the data allows that executive, those leadership folks, to go to one place to get a perspective of all of the data. So it really gives them a focus rather than having to go to multiple systems for that same information.
And the same dashboard, as we pointed out before, could offer a drill path out to a cube if we want to provide that more information, or it might, not provide that access. So it's really up to how you want to serve up those users and the needs of who's looking at the dashboard. This is a Microsoft Power BI. Might be something down at the department level as an example of showing physician productivity. We talk about readjusting work RVUs for 2021 and, potentially comparing physician productivity to their compensation to understand who are the most productive physicians and also the highest compensated versus potentially who are the least productive and lower compensated. You'll see, again, physicians like that interaction. They like the visual. Dashboard could even go down if we want to dig a little deeper behind some of these metrics, but still at a summary level where potentially we're looking at our, E&M codes that were changed significantly. We want to look at how we're performing, current year, prior year, or we want to look at our, scheduling, and there's that patient satisfaction data. So typically more visual dashboards for leadership, some level of interaction. They may or may not want to be able to drill down to detail.
Here's an example of a executive dashboard. It's still visual. This is done with Excel. It's still interactive, so I can look at my different specialties and all of the data changes. And I'm also blending data. I've still got my key financial metrics with my work RVUs and those adjusted work RVUs, and then also pulling in some scheduling data. So This is a different style of dashboard, and actually next month our webinar is on this design technique, using Excel versus web visualization, and hopefully you can all join us for that webinar coming up at the end of June. Let's talk about the next set of users, that clinical and operations staff. So as I mentioned earlier, these still using data, they're more focused data, it's more departmental data sets, along with some of the limited data down to the details. And when we talk about doing and generating reports, report distribution is very important. And we see report distribution in sort of two methods. One of them is that push method, where I can email reports to users. We have a tool here at PDF Distributor that allows you to email reports. A lot of the analytics tools allow you to automatically schedule and email reports directly out of your analytics. Sometimes you got to think about, how many you're sending, because everybody's inbox gets pretty full. But it's an effective way when the user comes in on Monday morning, his or her report is there and it's ready to utilize.
A most common technique for pushing reports, sending them out via email. They can be scheduled. They can be automated. This is an example of a Tableau summary dashboard that could be queued up to go via PDF and emailed. So most common technique for pushing reports right through email. Not always so good for any kind of clinical data due to PHI, but certainly for key revenue financial metrics, works very well. The common, I call it a push method, but it's kind of a combination of the two methods we're going to talk about here, is that reports can be pushed to folders where then someone can just go in and open up the various dashboards. So as they're published, they're sort of sitting right out in a shared folder, quickly accessible to the various end users.
Yeah, Russell, so you talked about that pull method. So obviously users can go, if you give them access, which is critical to being able to obtain reports, is giving them access, so don't be afraid to do that. And that's where they can then just even navigate to the analytics tool. So here I go in and I can navigate to the provider dashboard as a physician, and then I can go ahead and look at my data. This example has the adjusted RVUs as well as your non-adjusted RVUs. I've also got some financial data. So this is just another example of being able to pull down the report by giving the user access.
Yeah, and this kind of ties back to what we were talking about, where not only are we showing the physician, we might pick up and use security as another method to lock down what the user would see or guide them to the answer. And then here you'll see we have the benchmark, we have the adjusted RVUs and the current RVUs, so trying to make a more visual dashboard to help explain, what are some of those changes that occurred with CMS.
Yeah, and another form of sort of the polling method is we talked about those analytics users that really need more details. You can give them access to guided analytics. Here's an example of a prompted report where the users can then fill in the report parameters just by simply answering the prompts on the screen. And then they can go ahead, maybe I'm looking for E&M codes for a specific time period. I can then get a detailed list of those patients that are relevant based on the criteria that I've selected. And then this report could either be utilized on the screen here, or of course, most tools you can export to Excel, which then could be given to a user to make phone calls, what other additional task needs to be completed with this detailed data.
Another common method of pushing out reports is to use some kind of a web portal like SharePoint, or many of the PDS customers use the PDS portal, where you click on a web link. In this case, instead of sort of dynamic web visual reports, you might be looking at your published Excel reports using the PDS Dash tool, or PDFs created through Tableau or Power BI or Click. So fairly easy for the end users to pull down the data sets they need. They're kind of already prepackaged up. Many users in some cases like working with Excel. So, a lot of different vehicles for pushing down reports. Now, at a very high level, what we've talked about is pulling reports, pushing reports, and lots of ways to distribute reports. What we haven't spent too much time on is, what do you put in the reports? How do you make guided analytics? Really, to me, the goal of guided analytics is we want to do 20% of the work and give users 80% of what they need, right? And so, it would be, we have to talk about some kind of content balance. We have to talk about not providing too many metrics or too many reports, right? And this may be easier, like we've been using examples of physicians and productivity, but when we start talking about clinical data or, quality data or data that might be directly related to the physician, we may need different ways to approach, more insights to that. So, but the key here is when we talk about balancing content, we want to talk about simplifying reports, simplifying report access, dashboards that are clean and clear, to me, being very careful of sort of putting every metric on every page. Today, it's not efficient. And obviously making it easier for them to get the data. And then, of course, always bringing in comparisons, whether it's against benchmarks, external, internal, their peer groups. So importantly, think about content and content balance, which we're going to talk about in next month's webinar as well.
Right. So, Russell, we've talked a lot about report styles, making sure the right user has the right data. Another key to self-servicing users is access to the report. So how am I going to get access to the reports? We want to make sure that we keep all of the users' reports well organized. This will keep them engaged, making sure they have a clear understanding of where to go for the report and pulling down or utilizing that report. The less clicks that they have to get, probably the more they're going to use the tool and the more they're going to use the data. Also, providing the appropriate data updates. How frequently does that dashboard or that data set have to get updated? We don't want to overwhelm our users. Updating too often may be overwhelming for users, in which case they may sort of turn off the access. While some other users may, again, we've talked about everybody wants all of the data. So the frequency may be more often. So really want to listen to your users and listen to what they need. One other approach to balancing access to data is by applying appropriate security, only allowing users to access the data that they need to. Not because you're trying to hide anything, but maybe to make it simpler for them, making it more streamlined for them. While some other organizations really want to sort of go through that, we're going to be, transparency. Everybody can see all of the data. And there's not really a correct approach, and maybe within your organization, one department may want to use security, another department may want to be full transparency. It really depends on what works best within your organization.
And the other point I'd like to bring up about report access is users' expectation. Everybody wants things fast, right? And I really emphasize that. They want optimized performance. One of our clients used to talk about 2.2 seconds. That's the expectation. That's how long somebody's willing to wait before they get impatient. I'm not sure that just applies to opening dashboards or reports, but in today's world, we're used to clicking in the browser. We want to get an answer. So 2.2 seconds may not be realistic given some of the data sets and the tools, but do keep in mind that users don't want to have to wait. In addition to being able to find what they want quickly and easily and have it clear, they also want to be able to get it, really as quick as possible. Let's talk about roadblocks. PDFs, we've been doing this for over 20 years, and some of the things that we see to successful self-service analytics and major roadblocks is sort of picking one tool. Everybody's got to use one tool. There's nothing wrong with a good tool set that's flexible and modular, but this top-down one tool will somehow serve every single user's needs in the organization. And and related to that, sometimes we hear, well, we're going to use that tool because it's part of an application we already have. So we have some analytics plugged into our billing system. This is what our billing vendor recommends. May or may not be appropriate to your organization, may not be able to serve all the different users, may not provide the functionality. today the vendors, there's so much competition with analytics tools, and most of the major vendors are practically giving tools to get you to try them. And so that leads to my second key point, which is today, if you're going to select an analytics vendor without piloting or testing it, you're really not doing your organization a service, because you can usually get either a trial period or a low cost. You can just go out and buy a couple licenses and really put that tool to the test. And that may work good for certain users, may not work good for other users. So just another key thing that we've seen, kind of rushing to pick the tool too quickly without really evaluating users and needs. The third area, we see this a lot, is no training or limited training. So organizations that are not providing enough training or support to really make self-service analytics feasible. And then on the other end, we have of the spectrum is, well, you can't get access to the tools unless you get on a plane and fly somewhere, and you have to do a heavy certification, maybe take several tests. There's nothing wrong, and it's good to train your users, make sure they understand their data. But if it becomes more of a burden than a support mechanism to make sure your analytics are effective, you have to keep that in mind as well. And then the last area, and I think all too often people get hung up on the tool instead of the information, the data insights that the tool can provide. And here at PDS, we've talked about this in some of our other webinars, but I do want to share, if you've structured your data, if you have good data governance, if you understand your standards, your metrics, we use star schema data models. The tool is pretty much any tool will work if you've structured your data warehouse effectively, if you've got good governance. And so where you may want to have a lead tool, this is a tool that handles 80–90% of our users, but there may be some carve-ups where you need another tool or the technology is emerging. The focus should be on getting the right data to the right people and less about which tool we want to try us on. So just a couple points there. Michelle, what would you say some of the keys to success that we've seen, since we just talked about roadblocks?
Yeah, so when you're creating a culture with self-service analytics, you want to make sure that you're empowering your users to be self-sufficient. You want to make sure that you providing access to the tool is appropriate, giving them not only the right tool, but giving them the right role within that tool. Making sure that you also support those users. We've also just talked about training as a roadblock. So one of the ways to overcome that is maybe you want to create a focus group. Maybe you want to do some lunch and learn sessions where you can help them understand data definitions. You can provide information on how to best utilize and understand the visualizations that you're providing them, as well as giving some guidance on how to utilize the tools best. Here at PDS, we find the most important key to self-servicing analytics, ensuring data governance, having a single source of truth. This really allows all of your users to be analyzing data and measuring data in the same way. You've got consistent definitions, you've got consistent data, you have no duplication of data. And that's really critical when everyone's utilizing the data. You don't want one department measuring one way and another department measuring another way. You want consistency, especially when you're comparing across different departments. And then continue improvement. You've created a lot of these nice visualizations and you're like, okay, you're done. No, you really want to continue and look for feedback. Use those focus groups that I mentioned to look for feedback. A lot of the tools have auditing capability. So which of the dashboards are being utilized, which ones aren't being utilized, and maybe you want to focus on those and why aren't you using this visualization? There's something that can be done to improve that. So it's always continuing and focusing and looking at not only your visualizations, but even your data sets, making sure you're focusing on the correct data elements. Certainly RVUs, as we've talked about, those have changed quite a bit, so that's become a focus. Maybe you need to create a different data set. Maybe you need to add additional items. So always working to improve your self-servicing analytics.
Brian Balfour said, as you gain fresh insight from your data, it opens the door to new questions. As you have new questions, you need to update your instrumentation and analysis. saying the process is done is saying you understand everything there is to know about your users. I think that really sums up what, Michelle, you just shared about continual improvement, that as we have data, as we work with data, and even I think what we've seen with the pandemic, where in some cases our whole patient access got turned upside down, how we were treating patients, ground to a halt, and in many cases we had to rebuild and redesign some of those reports. CMS came along, we started seeing changes in RVU values with the codes. Then there were some major changes both to E&Ms and how we're measuring productivity. So we have to continually be thinking how to improve and how do we make sure we're not going backwards, but we're really adding more value and making our self-service analytics easier for users. So,
thank you, everyone.
Good. Have a great day. Be well.